I think we have to recognize when we live in pluralistic society that each individual, regardless of his religion, race, or background, deserves the right to have access to security, development, and be protected by the rule of law and human rights. It is when we do not accept the diversity and people feel excluded that tensions begin to build. I think the difference is in some societies, you have strong institutions. You have a rule of law which ensures the protection of all. And you also have a culture of tolerance and acceptance that diversity is something to be celebrated and is our strength. And by and large, in those societies, people tend to accept that what unites us is much stronger than what divides us. Yes, there are many poor countries where people live in harmony. And it is possible for the poor to accept to live with their neighbor and in fact be supportive of each other. We have many poor societies which live peacefully, where neighbors look after each other. The problems occur when you have scarce resources in some situations and there's fighting over whether it's water or other things, or a sense that governmental institutions is not extended to cover all citizens. It is that exclusion or inability to participate or a sense of isolation that often leads to tensions. But we have poor societies that have managed these things very well. So it's not poverty that does. If you have resources and you have strong institutions and you have established rule of law, it is easier. It should be easier, but even there you have problems. First of all, you have to start with dialogue. You have to try to encourage reconciliation. But you must also understand the root causes of the conflict. Why the breakdown? Why did it occur? What makes people who've lived side by side sometimes turn on each other? How do you make sure that it doesn't happen again? How do you put in place systems that ensures that you can mitigate and resolve these conflicts without it exploding into violence? Or you can even anticipate it and try and resolve it before it happens. And the countries that do these sort of things well often are able to avoid this. But when it does break down, I think it is important to look at the root causes. Otherwise, you are putting a plaster on it and it can be repeated in a year or 5 years. I think it has to start with a very clear understanding of the root causes and to determine if there's something that can be done about them to ensure that they don't linger and fester. But you also need to involve the society. The people have to be involved in the attempts to resolve the root causes. It is not something that you can impose on them, because to resolve the root causes, it requires dialogue, conversations, attempts to reach understanding and to get the groups to understand each other, and also for them to understand what the measures you're taking to remove the root causes will do for them. How you have to get them interested, and for them to know that if they cooperate on dealing with the root causes, the future may be much more peaceful for them and their children. No, that's a very good question. And indeed, unless we do something about climate change, until we step up innovation on how to mitigate and deal with climate change, we're going to see far more greater tensions. In fact, already we are seeing what one may call environmental migrants. You know, people who may move from one region to the other because there's lack of water, and they get to a new location, and the residents say, wait a moment, we have our own water problem. You are not going to come here and compound the problem. And then the tensions begin. But if, as a society, we take the environment seriously, the climate change seriously, and come up with approaches and sustainable ways of tapping into the resources of the world, we may be able to do better. For example, one is looking at drought-resistant seeds, water-tolerant seeds and plants that can grow in water during floods, to ensure that despite these changes, we will have enough food for people, so that it doesn't become a source of tension and conflict with one group feeling they are being left out. And also the government will have a much greater role to play in ensuring that groups in society are taken care of despite the shifts in the climate and the and scarcity of resources. And this is where, in a way, depending on the society you live in, if it's a democracy, you are fine. Amartya Sen, who's a Nobel laureate economist who grew up in India, at the age of 9, Amartya tells me he went through famine where there was not much to eat. Not only did he learn, but India also learned. And India focuses a lot on food production, food security. And Amartya walked out of this experience with an insight. He said, people in democracy do not starve. And he's right. You starve them once and you're out of office forever. So you do everything to make sure you satisfy their needs and across the board. The Global Center has a very important task in the sense that we now live in such an interconnected world. Almost every society is pluralistic, and yet hardly any society can claim that it has a perfect system, a perfect approach to dealing with this. And each society has to tackle it, bearing in mind its own special peculiarities. It's not one size fits all. And so to be able to do research, look around the world, share positive experiences with others, in some cases perhaps anticipate where problems are likely to brew, is going to be a great service for many societies, because we all need to manage pluralistic societies, and it's not easy to govern such societies. I mean, I've had situations where countries in Europe who used to say, we have no tensions, we have no discrimination. They had no tensions and no discrimination until they had somebody to discriminate against. That is a challenge. When they come, if you are homogeneous and others, is different. But when new groups come in, then the problem begins. And this is where the center's work is going to be important for all of us.